Hello everybody, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. And this morning I want to talk about skipping breakfast and eating breakfast and the merits of including breakfast in your daily plan. An analysis of 6 prospective studies, including over 96,000 participants, showed that skipping breakfast was associated with an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The authors of this study noted that a previous analysis had shown the same association, but this review was limited because all of the studies that were included in the analysis, some of them did not account for BMI, which is a risk factor for diabetes. The researchers sought to do this analysis and account for BMI, since it is a risk factor for diabetes, and see if the association would remain. The researchers reported that skipping breakfast 4 to 5 days per week was associated with a 55% increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and the risk increased with the number of days breakfast was skipped. In other words, the effect was dose dependent. When BMI was factored in, the association remained but was slightly attenuated. The strongest association was with a combination of breakfast skipping and consuming a Western dietary pattern, and this association was found in the health professionals' follow-up study included in the analysis. Now, to be clear, data in this case was reported in relative rather than absolute numbers, but there are a lot of reasons to pay attention to this study and to talk about this breakfast issue. First, the incidence of diabetes continues to increase. 8.8% of the world's population currently has type 2 diabetes. If skipping meals is a factor, let's face it, it may be easier to fix this factor than a lot of other factors, and it would positively, potentially at least, positively affect an awful lot of people. Many studies have shown that eating patterns, not just what you eat, but the pattern of eating, has a lot to do with weight gain, insulin resistance, and increased risk of type 2 diabetes. So this is certainly not the only analysis that has arrived at a conclusion like this. Skipping breakfast has been associated with worsening glucose control, both for diabetics and healthy people. One study of Australian children and adolescents showed that children who ate breakfast were more likely to be normal weight despite taking in more calories than their breakfast skipping counterparts. Data from a prospective population-based cohort study from the UK showed that those who consumed the most calories at breakfast actually had the lowest BMI. Some studies show that skipping breakfast is also correlated with increased health risks associated with having diabetes, such as cardiovascular disease. A Japanese study showed that skipping breakfast is associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke and cerebral hemorrhage. Data from a Spanish study showed that skipping breakfast is associated with an increased risk of atherosclerosis independent of other typical cardiovascular risk factors. Conversely, studies have shown positive effects from eating breakfast on overall diet quality. Breakfast improves satiation, appetite regulation, and increases the intake of vitamins and other nutrients. Breakfast eaters in general consume more fiber and less added sugars than those who skip it. Now, there are a lot of reasons why I wanted to report the results of this study. First, in our experience, many overweight and almost all of our obese new members are meal skippers. They often eat a very low-calorie diet, and their metabolisms border on comatose. For these people, years of restricted diets, alternating with reverting to old habits when their willpower finally ran out, have resulted in a complete inability to determine when they're hungry and when they're full. Eating on a schedule is one proven technique for regulating hunger and satiety. More starvation is not what is needed. More frequent eating, more food, and learning what real meals look like is. The other reason I wanted to cover it is that many health professionals are promoting intermittent fasting to the general public as a way to cure everything ranging from diabetes to obesity. I think it's an ill-advised practice for most people, and here's why. The window of eating starts sometime mid-morning and ends late afternoon or dinner time, which means that skipping breakfast is what happens for most people. I'm up at 5 a.m., so eating 4 hours later isn't breakfast. It's actually getting kind of close to lunch. Furthermore, those who exercise early morning do so on an empty stomach, which really results in less aggressive exercise. Some people disagree with me on this, but just pick up any sports nutrition textbook. Fuel is needed for exercise performance. Where does the fuel come from for someone who hasn't eaten for 12 to 14 hours? Stored glycogen, and when that's used up, and it goes pretty quickly, muscle mass. And what the muscle mass does, the body will break down stored lean muscle mass to access amino acids that readily convert to glucose to be used for fuel. Now, some people say intermittent fasting will cause you to burn fat. Well, that's only the case if you engage in endurance exercise, which is a really bad idea on an empty stomach after having not eaten for many, many hours. Diabetics who go for long periods of time without eating have poor glucose control, and studies show, for example, that they're better off eating something before bedtime, and they're more likely to have normal glucose levels in the morning if they do so. There's an article in our library, if you're a member, on this very topic about eating at night and the effect that it has on various people. A high-fiber, low-fat, plant-based diet requires eating more volume of food than most people are used to eating. So trying to eat within the window while intermittent fasting means eating very large meals or eating higher fat foods in order to consume enough calories with fewer meals. That's not a good idea, in my opinion. Many who practice intermittent fasting, when they arrive here thinking that it's a good idea, tell us that they feel uncomfortably full after eating, which alternates with distracting hunger during long periods without food. People are told that the body will not perform autophagy or house cleaning unless they practice intermittent fasting. This isn't true. There's an article in the Health Briefs library about this, all the other things that generate housekeeping or autophagy in the human body. And I'll refer you to the article rather than incorporating all of that into this particular talk. Not one study shows that intermittent fasting is superior to eating a well-structured, whole foods, low-fat, plant-based diet like the one we recommend. That's not the type of research that's been done on intermittent fasting. So, all good reasons why this may not be such a good idea. But there's another important reason why I recommend against it. Without any advantage to doing so for most people, the practice separates people from family meals and celebrations involving food. It's ridiculous for somebody to attend a birthday party or a dinner or wedding reception or other event and drink water while everybody else is eating. People who adopt healthy habits have enough challenges learning to do so without adding another layer of complication. I've often said that this and other practices like no processed foods, pasta will kill you, coffee is bad, I never eat dessert, don't salt your food, it just really causes people to think that their friend or family member must have been abducted at the airport and brainwashed by a strange cult and dropped off at the restaurant for the birthday party tonight. I mean, you know, those of us who are trying to help people regain their health with healthier habits should stop making things so difficult. America is not going to get healthier when we continue to promote things that are barriers to people deciding to do this. The science of change is actually just as rich and deep as the science of nutrition. And we know a lot about what motivates people to change. And the two biggest factors that will get people to the place of wanting to start are A, they think that the change that's being proposed will benefit them. And the second thing right behind that is they can see themselves doing it. And I think it's our job to present a plausible plan of action for people that they can see that it'll benefit them, they can see themselves doing it, they can remain compliant with it over a long period of time, because 3 weeks of perfection has never reversed any disease that I know of or prevented anything. It's long-term compliance with an excellent diet that can actually have that effect. So let's start putting reasonable plans in front of people. Let's start showing people how to fit in and have a completely normal life in terms of family, social engagements, nonprofit work, and that sort of thing. Yes, making different dietary choices. Yes, paying more attention to your health. But no, not doing unnecessary things that just make life more difficult for the people who are trying to do this. So, for those reasons, I don't recommend intermittent fasting. I do recommend breakfast, and I hope that you'll take this information to heart and adopt a plan that you can stick with too. All right, that's all for today, all for the week. As usual, hit the subscribe button if you're not a subscriber. Pass this on to anybody else who you think would enjoy watching it, and I'll be back to you next week with more news.